Welcome to the listening tube.
Hello, and thank you for putting your ear to the listening tube. I'm your host, Bob Woodley. On this episode, we'll hear about San Marino, Cooch's Bridge, and the scourge of illegal immigrants. But first,
Not the headlines.
there are all kinds of discrimination in the world today. Sexual discrimination, age discrimination, discrimination based on the color of your skin, income discrimination. If you're a person of color, you might even face discrimination from other persons of color because of the shade of your color. White people don't seem to have that problem. White people don't discriminate against other white people because their skin isn't white enough. If that were the case, albino people would look down their noses at everyone. Maybe they do. I don't know. But that doesn't mean white people don't discriminate against other white people. Just to find out, some white people are taking other white people to court. A Reuters story says the largest U.S. newspaper company is looking at a discrimination lawsuit brought by 5 current or former employees alleging racial discrimination. Nearly all of Gannett's executive leadership are white, and it would seem that so are all of the plaintiffs. The employees say they were passed over for promotions or replaced by less qualified women and minorities. And that's how I'm pretty sure the plaintiffs are white guys. I haven't seen pictures of them, but 2 of them are named Stephen and Logan. They hope to make the suit, filed in Virginia federal court, a class action suit. Not all of the plaintiffs worked at the same newspaper, but all were subject to the rules and regulations of the parent company, Gannett. Normally, it would be very difficult for a white guy to claim racial discrimination by a corporate employer. But because so many corporations are striving to be politically correct and subservient to special interests, they've begun to implement policies that, while meant to promote diversity and equity and inclusion, actually discriminate against the majority. The Gannett policy in question was introduced in 2020 and, according to the lawsuit, has a goal of having all of its newsrooms reflecting the demographics of the places they cover by the year 2025. I'm just going to stop right here and say that any policy that endeavors to make a workforce demographic the same as the population demographics is undoubtedly racist. Anytime you initiate a policy that dictates you hire or promote people based on race or gender, you're violating the law. It doesn't matter if your goal is a worthy one. In this case, Gannett clearly stated the goal, which could only be accelerated through discrimination. The goal may have been accomplished organically, given enough time, but the deadline of 2025 clearly required an accelerated process, one that would result in discrimination. But the deadline and the lawsuit claim that executive bonuses and promotions were tied to reaching the goals of equal representation. To make the workforce reflect the population may be all that's needed to convince a jury or judge that discrimination took place. Now, you might be thinking, but Bob, you're a white guy. You have no idea what discrimination is. Well, as I pointed out at the beginning of this story, there are a variety of types of discrimination. I may not have experienced the same kind you have, and I'm clearly not going to claim I've been discriminated against my whole life just because of the way I look. But I have been the victim of discrimination, and it happened to me when I was 17 years old in 1979. I had secured a part-time gig on my hometown radio station when I was still in high school. I dedicated myself to that place. Went in after it signed off at midnight just to practice running the control board when my mom would let me. I had earned the respect of the other disc jockeys there, and puberty had blessed me with the voice you hear now. I had positioned myself to take control of the next available full-time radio show. I was prepared to spend my life there, entertaining and informing the local population. But then the federal government came down with a mandate for radio stations. As you may know, the Federal Communications Commission regulates and licenses all radio stations in the country. You either follow their rules or you don't get to keep your license. Well, the mandate required that at least one full-time on-air personality be a woman. At that time, men dominated the radio announcer business. The radio station where I had cut my teeth had no female announcers. Now, they had to find a full-timer, and fast. So all the hard work I put in to put myself in a position to succeed was usurped by a government mandate that discriminated against me because I'm a man. Am I upset? I was, but not anymore. Had I got what I wanted then, I may have ended up being a big fish in a small pond, a local radio personality with a worn-out catchphrase. Instead, I traveled the world, lived all over America, and compiled life experiences I could never have dreamed of had Plan A worked. In hindsight, you might say I was rewarded by discrimination rather than victimized by it. The same fate might befall the 5 people suing Gannett. Time will tell. As for now, Gannett's law firm says, "We will vigorously defend our practice of ensuring equal opportunities for all our valued employees against this meritless lawsuit." 2 things about that statement stand out to me. First, they say valued employees, which would indicate that at least some of their employees are not valued, and meritless lawsuit. I'm always suspicious when I see the words meritless or baseless in a statement. Both words are meant to sway an opinion. Why does the defendant of a lawsuit get to say it's meritless? The lawsuit will determine that. Why does someone charged with a crime get to call it a baseless allegation? Won't the trial determine if it was baseless or not? When it comes to legalese, terms like baseless and meritless are redundant in the sense that we're all innocent until proven guilty. Using an adverb doesn't have any weight in a court of law. From my unofficial observations, anyone who uses meritless or baseless is probably guilty of whatever it is in question, and they need more time to come up with a more convincing argument. Later, it can be used in the past tense to display condescension or to rub it in. Gannett isn't the only company that's had trouble conforming to outside forces. There was a time when corporate decisions were made based on profits. Then, gradually, corporations learned that their profit margins could be grown in ways they hadn't thought of. Keeping employees happy led to a decline in turnover, reducing training costs. Helping employees stay healthy cut down on sick time. Safety precautions reduce injuries and company liability. Now you might be thinking, but Bob, people are speaking with their wallets. If they don't like your company's social policies, they won't buy your products. If that's the case, then companies like Gannett have calculated the risk and reward, right? Setting employment ratios based on race and gender is obviously a sound business model. Who did the math for Bud Light? When it comes to newspapers, does anyone read a story and decide whether or not to believe it based on the percentage of black people who work there? Or even worse, the percentage of white people who work there? Well, I read the Gannett policy, and it's clearly racist. One goal is to achieve a 30% increase in the representation of people of color in leadership positions. That is the very definition of racism. It's almost outright bigotry. But Gannett doesn't stop there. The next goal is to reach racial and gender parity with the diversity of our nation. So the Gannett policy is not just racist, but also sexist. It's worth noting that Gannett's executive branch is 40% female. Last I checked, women outnumbered men in the United States, so they obviously have too many men making decisions there. So what did they do exactly? Well, Logan says he was in line for a promotion at the paper where he worked when the job was given to somebody of a different race and gender who, according to the lawsuit, was less qualified. The story doesn't say what position it was, but maybe in his current but now former position, he made a big mistake. Here's where all the leadership positions are at a newspaper. Publisher, editor, and sales director are the top three. Then you have production manager, press room foreman, composing foreman, and mailroom foreman. None of the four men are required to be men. It's just a title. That's if the newspaper is a small independent newspaper or local level operation. For corporations, you have other titles for people who oversee the local level operations for multiple papers or regions. I'm guessing the people filing the suit were looking at some of those upper-level corporate positions. The guy named Steven says he was fired from his job and also rejected for another job at his newspaper. He says it's because he's white, and he's also filed another lawsuit at the state level. All it says about Steven's position is that it was a management job. The court will have to decide if the men were discriminated against because they have white skin, or if it was something else, like maybe they sucked at their jobs, or maybe they just weren't promotion worthy. But the Supreme Court, in its decision against race-based college admissions, has already demonstrated its rejection of race-based anything. The lawsuit even mentions that the United States Supreme Court said in that decision that, quote, eliminating discrimination means eliminating all of it, unquote. Clearly, the Gannett policy of mandating percentages and timetables, as well as promotions and bonuses based on race and gender-based hiring, is a violation of federal law. A tragedy happened in Jacksonville, Florida last week when a white man shot and killed 3 innocent people because they were black. The guy had swastikas decorating his weapon. He was on a suicide mission, and he was going to take innocent people with him. I know this isn't a not the headline story yet, but I'll get there soon. He targeted black people who were just going about their day, ending their lives and changing forever the lives of their loved ones and friends. These acts of racial violence have to stop, and in order to try to stop them, we have to figure out what causes them. Sure, race was the main factor, but even those deranged enough to hate black people in the first place don't all go out and kill some on a whim, then commit suicide. It's a despicable act of cowardice all the way around. Pointing fingers begins practically before the crime scene blood is even dry. We know it was racism, but that's not enough. While the story was splashed all over the news, there was another story developing. Since the tragedy happened in Florida, a Republican-run state, the Democrats put the story to work right away, and in a manner as despicable as the murders themselves. A man who is a Baptist bishop, pastor of a Jacksonville church, and board member of Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network, was quoted by the Associated Press as saying, "Nobody is having honest, candid conversations about the presence of racism." Well, Bishop, I'm pretty sure that's not true. Everybody who's heard of this tragedy knows it was caused by racism, and people are talking about it. Even before George Floyd died, we were talking about racism. That's a conversation that's been going on throughout the history of America. Maybe you weren't paying attention. But then he zeroes in on what he really thinks caused the killings. This divide exists because of the ongoing disenfranchisement of black people and a governor who's really propelling himself forward through bigoted, racially motivated, misogynistic, xenophobic actions to throw red meat to a Republican base. Well, Bishop, I hope you're prepared to defend that statement when you reach the pearly gates. I don't think Jesus takes kindly to lies like that one. The real reason for this divide of which you speak is partly because of rhetoric like yours. I defy you, Bishop, to produce one piece of evidence that proves a direct connection to any DeSantis-supported law or regulation and the people killed in Jacksonville. It's irresponsible for you to say there is, and misleading to your congregation. Perhaps it's you who's throwing red meat to your base, but with lies. Perhaps your political activism should disqualify you from any nonprofit status you may enjoy because of your religious affiliation. But a state representative went even further. But she was careful enough to not mention anybody or position by name, nor any political party. We must be clear, she said, it was not just racially motivated. It was racist violence that has been perpetuated by rhetoric and policies designed to attack black people, period. Again, I would challenge the representative from Florida to produce any evidence that a political policy of the current state administration has a direct link to some wacko killing 3 people because they were black. It's not normal. It's not what normal people do. But then the representative goes on to widen the blame and the divide by saying, we cannot sit idly by as our history is being erased, as our lives are being devalued, as wokeness is being attacked, because let's be clear, that is red meat to a base of voters. There's that phrase again, red meat. When one thinks of red meat, you might imagine a pack of lions feasting on a fresh catch brought down by the lionesses. A feeding frenzy, filling up as quickly as you can because you don't know how long you have to survive until your next meal. Clearly, the Democrats and liberals in Jacksonville are the ones who appear to be feasting on any available red meat. Even though the governor was quoted by the AP as saying on behalf of all Floridians that he condemns the horrific racially motivated murders perpetrated by a deranged scumbag. But that wasn't enough to keep racists on the left from trying to capitalize on the senseless killing. The representative from Jacksonville also needs to understand that nobody is trying to erase anybody's history, and that wokeness only leads to loss of market share and intellectuals getting fired for speaking the truth, if they dare do so in today's environment. And as far as black people being devalued, let's ask LeBron James about his value, or the best basketball player ever, Michael Jordan. Let's ask Reverend Sharpton about his value. Sure, these are extreme examples, but in America, you get to decide your value. Probably with a lot of help from the people who believe in you. Wait, no, that would be a politician. But only a racist politician would start an organization called Melanin Market. Don't get me wrong, the organization seems to have some worthy goals, like helping small business owners and filling food deserts with healthy options. But with a name like Melanin Market, it's clearly meant to discourage white people from receiving any assistance. She couldn't wait to use a tragedy to attack a white governor who's also running for president of the United States. Her statements are meant to divide and create fear. She might not even realize the harm she's doing by saying those things and keeping that big divide they keep telling us about as wide as possible, but she's willing to spew the garbage, so I hope her words tasted like it. And another thing about wokeness. Wokeness tries to dictate speech by dissecting what we say and then trying to eliminate the parts that are not inclusive of the sometimes excluded, while threatening those who feel we should be free to say what we want, with boycotts, isolation, and dismissals. I think what makes a lot of people frustrated, in much the same way a vegan college student might be triggered by a description of a cow being slaughtered. I won't describe that here, but not because I care about vegan feelings. Oh, wait, what? You say you want to hear it? Well, in that case, it all starts when a giant blade... No, I'm just kidding. But wokeness isn't good for society. It isn't good for business. It isn't good for anything. It's just a group of people who are trying to enforce their will on everybody else, making them say things the way they want them to be said, installing policies that restrict free speech and freedom of expression if your expression is not radical leftist nonsense. It's damaging our kids and how they interact with society. We're teaching them that they can identify as anything they want to get whatever they want or get away with whatever they want. Wokeness is communism in sheep's clothing. Total control over what is acceptable, regardless of tradition, regardless of personal beliefs, regardless of religion, regardless of law. Wokeness has already infiltrated most of us. If you were ever in a position where you wanted to say something about society or politics, but didn't because you were afraid of repercussions, because you were afraid of losing your job or having your friends abandon you or becoming an internet meme, you could be a victim of wokeness. But don't confuse wokeness with self-restraint. There were plenty of occasions where people wouldn't say certain things long before wokeness came along. For example, there are some things you shouldn't say if you're the best man giving a speech at the wedding reception, or if your friend is really proud of her new hairstyle and you think it would look better if it had a birdcage in it. But wokeness concerns itself not only with what we say, but how we say it. That's the difference. When you're forced to say birthing parent instead of mom, you might start wondering what the hell is going on. If you don't want that to happen, don't support anybody who supports wokeness.
Let's go back through the listening tube for This Week in History.
This week, in the year 301, San Marino, one of the smallest nations in the world and the world's oldest republic still in existence, is founded by Saint Marinus. Yes, I said founded in the year 301, a mere 300 years after Christians started keeping track of how long it's been since Christ, and similar to the calendar we use today. That's 1,722 years that this republic has maintained its present-day borders. Sure, the Egyptians and the Chinese have been around for thousands of years as nation-states. Their empires grew and shrank with their power and influence. San Marino has been a steady force through some of the most fought-over regions in modern history. By steady force, I mean neutral. In both the Great War, now known as World War I, and the Second World War, now known as World War II. Let me tell you where San Marino is. And no, it's not the parking lot of the stadium where Dan Marino played his home games. San Marino is a landlocked island inside the country of Italy. Kind of like the Vatican, but even older. So what kind of government has lasted for over 1,700 years when the great American experiment is only around 250? I'm going to look that up.
He's gonna look it up. He's really gonna do it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Well, this is a very interesting government indeed. According to Wikipedia, San Marino's constitution dictates that its democratically elected legislature, which they call the Grand and General Council, must elect two heads of state, known as captains regent, and the two heads of state serve concurrently and with equal powers. I'll bet that makes the seating charts at state dinners more complicated than anywhere else in the world. You know what they say in football? If you have two starting quarterbacks, you don't have any. But here's the kicker, pun intended. The Grand and General Council must elect 2 heads of state every 6 months. You think the American political cycle is exhausting? It makes you wonder how they get anything done. But on the other hand, it's harder to cozy up to somebody in power because they might not be in power in 6 months.
The 1700s.
This week in 1776, the Continental Congress officially names its new union of sovereign states the United States. Happy anniversary! And that this anniversary might be just as important as the date of the Declaration of Independence. Our independence as a country is certainly worth celebrating, but our Declaration of Unity is what made us confident enough to move forward. Independence gives you the right to make your own rules, but unity is what you need to make rules that are reasonable and just. This week in 1777, during the American Revolutionary War, during the Battle of Cooch's Bridge, the flag of the United States is flown in battle for the first time. We'd been fighting a war against an adversary who has a symbol of its conquer, and we don't? Even a year after we gave ourselves the name United States? I don't think I have to explain how important a symbol can be to inspire troops. Credit to those who came up with their own symbols to represent themselves before there was one unifying symbol. Our American flag is a less unifying symbol now than it was back then. This week in 1783, also during the American Revolutionary War, the war ends with the signing of the Treaty of Paris by the United States and the Kingdom of Great Britain, over 7 years after the Declaration of Independence.
The 1800s.
This week in 1810, the Tonquin set sail from New York Harbor with 33 employees of John Jacob Astor's newly created Pacific Fur Company. They sailed the seas for 6 months on a journey around the tip of South America, because back then, that was the only way to get there, and that's how long it took. The ship arrives at the mouth of the Columbia River, and Astor's men establish the fur trading town of Astoria, Oregon. I can only imagine how plentiful the fur was, so much wildlife that you might trip over it. All kinds of bunny rabbits and foxes and bigger stuff if you could catch it. There was money to be made if you had the will to travel around the tip of South America, because a northern passageway from the Atlantic to the Pacific had not yet been found, despite many attempts to find one. This week in 1855, during the Crimean War, the siege of Sevastopol comes to an end when Russian forces abandon the city. See, the Russians have been crying about the Crimea for over a century. They took it over again in 2014, even though it was part of Ukraine. Now they want all of Ukraine. I hope Ukraine pushes the invading Russian forces back into Russia and out of Crimea too.
The 1900s. And here's some unfinished business.
This week in 1901, an anarchist shoots and fatally wounds U.S. President William McKinley at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. This is unfinished business because on a previous episode, I made a mistake and my mom corrected me. I said she went to Garfield School, when in fact it was McKinley Annex that burned down when she was a student there. This week in 1945, during the Cold War, Igor Gozhenko, a Soviet Union embassy clerk, defects to Canada, exposing Soviet espionage in North America, signaling the beginning of the Cold War. After World War II, both America and the Soviet Union saw an opportunity to have great influence in the political world. The likely truth is that America had operations inside the Soviet Union at the same time. We just never heard about them. And I'm okay with that. I don't want to know what our country is doing to keep us safe. There's a level of security in the military called need to know, and I'm sure there's a lot that I don't need to know. It would be cool if our government could tell us all the secrets they know about our adversaries, but you just know there's going to be that one guy who lets the cat out of the bag, and the next thing you know, our spy satellites are getting pelted with BBs released by a Russian satellite. That's why they keep that stuff a secret. And odds are you didn't hear about it on the Listening Tube podcast, because right now, you're the only one listening to this. You've reached the pinnacle of independence. Moving on, sometimes we give things names or use certain phrases, and we have no idea why they're called that or why we say it that way. Why is a tomato called a tomato or a tomato? See what I mean? And what does it mean if somebody is the bee's knees? There are a lot of old phrases, and one of them might be older than you think. Most of us would guess that the term computer bug is a modern term, but it was this week in 1947 the first actual case of a computer bug happened. It happened at Harvard University when a moth lodges itself in a relay of the Harvard Mark II computer. Today, there just might be more computer bugs than there are actual insects on the planet. This week in 1954, the German U-boat U-505 begins its move from a specially constructed dock to its final site at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. I was there in 1982. I don't remember seeing it. This week in 1966, the first Star Trek series premieres on NBC. May the Force be with you.
Well, that can't be right.
This week in 1977, the Torrijos-Carter treaties between Panama and the United States on the status of the Panama Canal are signed. The United States agrees to transfer control of the canal to Panama at the end of the 20th century. Guess who's trying to get control of the Panama Canal now? China. This week in 1988, Yellowstone National Park is closed for the first time in U.S. history due to ongoing fires. Climate change, said nobody. This week in 1994, the Sino-Soviet split. Russia and the People's Republic of China agreed to de-target their nuclear weapons against each other.
The Listening Tube will return at the speed of sound. Contact the Listening Tube by calling 570-601-1101 or email thelisteningtube@outlook.com.
The migrant crisis in America has hit a peak. Major cities in the United States are at capacity. New York City and the state of New York are calling on the Biden administration to pony up more tax dollars to support all of the immigrants that have flooded the country via our southern border and have spread all over the country by the millions. But because the New York governor and New York City mayor are Democrats, they aren't calling on the Biden administration to stop the flow of immigrants, most of whom now are illegal immigrants, but what they're calling for is more money. More of your tax dollars, billions of tax dollars, to house and educate and keep healthy all of the illegal immigrants, the ones who forged across the Rio Grande into Texas somewhere other than a legal point of entry. While the Biden administration claimed only Congress could fix the problem, the Biden Department of Justice sued states for using their own methods of trying to stem the flow, such as using shipping containers as makeshift walls in Arizona, or the floating balls being employed in Texas. We've seen federal employees cutting barbed wire and opening locked gates for illegal immigrants, while the southern states are being inundated with walls of people and a cacophony of languages from all over the world. It's one thing for the federal government to not do anything to stop the flow. It's another thing for the federal government to actually aid in the illegal entries to the country they're sworn to protect. The President of the United States is not powerless to stop the illegal invasion. He's simply unwilling. In my opinion, no one who is unwilling to protect the borders of the country, any country, is fit to lead it. That's your number one job. The out-of-control flow of illegal immigration into the United States is so out of control that public parks are being turned into makeshift refugee camps. Except in the United States, refugee camps have air conditioning and laundry rooms and big-screen TVs. Plus, you have your own cell phone. Hotels are now occupied by migrants instead of guests. But instead of tourists paying for them, it's the taxpayers, you and me, footing the bill. That's only for those lucky enough to have indoor shelter. The homeless population, the correct way to say it now is the unhoused. Who came up with that one? And what makes it any better than homeless? When you say unhoused, it makes it sound like we're just product to be stored somewhere. It also sounds like certain people don't deserve a home. They're only worthy of a house. I guess whoever made up unhoused never had the satisfaction of feeling at home. Home is wherever you make it. It can be a mansion, sure. It can also be a log cabin in the woods or an efficiency apartment with your favorite blacklight poster. These people don't have anywhere to live, and you won't even allow them the option of a home. Only a house. Or in the case of the migrants piling up on the streets of our major cities, probably some empty warehouse. Or a former department store that closed because of the dilapidated conditions that suddenly befell the neighborhood. Home is where the heart is, so whoever came up with the term unhoused must not have a heart. So while cities try to find somewhere to house or find a home for, all of these immigrants, all the homeless people who were born here are going, what the hell? Why are all these foreign people getting taken care of all of a sudden while we've been here living on the street the whole time? Where's our help? They have a good case. It's got to the point where illegal immigrants are being given preferential treatment when compared to how we normally treat our local homeless people. If I was still homeless, I'd be pissed off. Strange how destitute and underprivileged people mostly vote Democrat, and all the Democrats seem to be doing is creating more destitute and underprivileged people. Meanwhile, responsible citizens are being squeezed out. And it's not just happening in America. A story in the Telegraph from over in England tells of how more than 150 students about to start university this fall were suddenly informed they had to find somewhere else to live because the British government plans to move more than 400 migrants into what were described as luxury student accommodation, including a game room, theater, and gym. Students attending the University of Huddersfield were paying about $1,000 a month for the privilege of living there. A management company was suddenly told by the owner of the place that their agreement was terminated with immediate effect. That left the students scurrying to find a new place to live right before classes began. Oh, and there's more. This area has been designated as an amber risk of a shortage of student beds by whatever British entity determines those things. But even in England, the migrants are given priority. The Telegraph story goes on to say that more than 20,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel this year. That's less than last year so far, and a fraction of what America is dealing with. Yet the socialist policies seem to be taking hold, although only when it comes to non-citizens. Oh, sure, the United States has a lot of socialist policies when it comes to the less fortunate, like welfare and other benefits. But now even the people who rely on the government for their survival are seeing the truth. America is a place where everybody has a chance at success. We've become strong because we rewarded those who worked hard, took a chance, believed in themselves. There are more millionaires and billionaires in the world today than ever before, and many of them live in America, or made their money there. This push for equity is meant to punish them, and by doing so, we will stifle the American spirit of risk-taking and the entrepreneurial spirit that made us great in the first place, and reduce us to a bunch of American national team soccer players who don't care how well they do, knowing they have to share the pay anyhow. The welfare state has corrupted American life to the point where we don't even recognize socialism when we see it anymore. By not securing our southern border, the Biden administration has created a situation where millions more people are now reliant on the American taxpayer. It's a way of creating equity by taking from those who are citizens and contributing to society, and then inviting those who don't to take advantage of it. It's forced equity. When President Biden complains that rich people aren't paying their fair share, what he's really saying is the government needs more money, and we've already bled the middle class dry, and we can't get anything out of the lower class. So, instead of controlling spending and being responsible with the government treasures, we'll steal more from the rich to give to the poor. And if the poor were Americans, you might have more support. After all, Americans are the most generous people on the planet. But if you just want more money to bring in more people who will add to the poverty and make the federal government a cash cow for illegal immigrants, then forget it. I'm not old enough to remember anything about the civil rights movements of the 1960s, but I have a vague memory of the tumultuous Vietnam era. That was certainly a rough patch for America. Watergate was a fiasco, but most Americans agreed that most of the offenders, including President Nixon, got their comeuppance. But this federal government that I see in America today has got to be the most scatterbrained, incompetent, misled, and misguided in our nation's history. It's obvious that President Biden is not in charge, and we don't know who is. And whomever is in charge of Joe Biden isn't concerned with what's in America's best interest. Joe Biden claimed he would be a uniter, but he only divides us. Joe Biden claimed he would be transparent, yet his press secretary tells us nothing. He rarely takes questions from reporters, and anyone who does take questions seems to refer you to somebody else for a comment on that, and when you ask them, the answer is no comment. For all I know, Hunter Biden is our president, and he's working for China. Our Department of Justice is corrupt. The top echelons of the FBI are corrupt, as well as some key minions. And when the Trump-Russia collusion farce was exposed, it proved the corruption went all the way to the top of the Democrat Party. Nothing's changed. The Democrat Party has become nothing more than a socialist party. How often does the failure of socialism have to be demonstrated to the world before people wake up? The irony is they call themselves woke, but can't see what's in front of their open eyes. Whomever is leading the Democrat Party is leading America down a dark path where everyone is equal, but equally defeated.
Hate your next door neighbor, but don't forget to say grace and tell me over and over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Oh, no, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
The Listening Tube is written and produced by yours truly. Copyright 2023. Thank you for putting your ear to the Listening Tube. Subscribe today. I'm your host, Bob Woodley, for Thou Ad Infinitum.